I'm very excited, and I think as far as the playoff is concerned, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I do think it's a net positive for the sport. Hello and welcome. It is always college football. Today is Sunday, December 8th. You might be getting this on Monday, December 9th, but I'm your host, Greg McElroy. Welcome in. Today is Selection Day, and what a day it was here in the college football world. Was just on the set alongside Reese Davis, Booger McFarland, and Joey Galloway for about 4 hours. And then we had Kirk Herbstreit and Nick Saban joining us as well with plenty of guests throughout the show. It was a lot of fun to be there. It was a lot of fun to be a part of it. And like we always do, we have some takeaways from the rankings, takeaways from some of the matchups that we have to look forward to, and some things that we've already kind of noticed that might be flawed with our current 12-team playoff system. This version of the 12-team playoff system. We will explain that here as we go along. If you guys are new to the show, like, rate, subscribe. Really appreciate you guys. We've been doing this a lot the last couple weeks. Our numbers are through the roof. We're coming off our best week ever, and we know that you guys will continue to push the envelope further with the support that you guys have given us. We're very, very grateful to you for all that you've done for us in supporting the show. So like, rate, subscribe. Appreciate you very much. Those of you that have been with us, you know that a big part of what we do here on Mondays and Sundays, we do takeaways. Usually it's 10, but because we have a somewhat condensed version of the show today between ranking shows, SportsCenter appearances, and I'm getting on a plane here in a little bit to go to Washington, D.C. to tape with Scott Van Pelt and Stanford Steve. Not as much time to do a 10 takeaway show, so we're going to do a 5 takeaway show, and we got 5 good ones for you. So we'll kick things off here in a moment with the big question that the committee was pressed with heading into these final rankings. Takeaway number 1. The committee kind of took the most justifiable route by putting SMU in the field of 12. Now, I think there's a lot of people that agree with the decision. I think there's a lot of people that disagree with the decision. That's probably about right. I think it's a really polarizing decision because both outcomes are less than stellar, right? Both outcomes are somewhat flawed, and logic, regardless of what side of the argument you're on, it's probably going to go out the window in some cases. So I'm just going to present both sides and allow you to jump to the conclusion that you want to jump to. We'll start with the case in favor of SMU. SMU, they ended up getting into the field. They'll now go on the road to Penn State. But SMU is sitting there at 11-1 when you freeze the college football season. 11-1, freeze the college football season prior to the ACC Championship game. The committee essentially told everybody that SMU is in the field at that point, correct? Why do they have to play in the ACC Championship game? If they just decide not to play in the ACC Championship game, Ward Manuel basically just told us that everyone that's not participating in an ACC Championship game or a championship game across the board, they're frozen. They can't do anything to improve and or hurt their resume. So with SMU being at 8, that basically put the onus on the committee to keep them in the event in which they lost close. Now, if they lost badly, that would have been a little bit different conversation, but they lost close. They lost on a walk-off field goal, and had SMU not been in the field, it might have created a really dangerous precedent for the committee because you were basically de-incentivizing participation in a conference championship game. Lane Kiffin has talked about this a couple weeks back, said, yeah, there are coaches that don't want to play in the conference championship game because it could expose a flaw in your team, could subject you to injury, and it could ultimately knock you out of the playoffs. Whereas you're being measured against teams that don't have to play. So I thought a slippery slope could get created if SMU was left out. But conversely, on the other side, and this is the argument in favor of Alabama. Alabama has the 16th ranked strength of schedule in the country. Alabama played and beat 3 teams that are ranked in the committee's top 19. They beat Georgia, the SEC champion and number 2 overall seed. They also beat number 14th ranked South Carolina and number 19th ranked Missouri. The team that they were being measured against, or the teams that they were being measured against, didn't have wins that would stand up to what Alabama had against South Carolina, against Missouri, and against Georgia. So the committee basically said, well, Alabama's highs, their ceiling, outrageously good, their floors, with the performance against Oklahoma being the one that stands out the most, that was what ultimately kept them out. But you have now kind of shown that record, win-loss record, is more important than overall strength of record and overall strength of schedule. So you are de-incentivizing teams from scheduling more challenging non-conference games. Because if Indiana's in, having played who they played in the non-conference, and if SMU's in, having not beaten a team that's in the top 25, what is the incentive to go play a home and home with Ohio State, with Notre Dame, or with Georgia? There's not one. So you might see teams start to schedule weaker out of conference, because if win-loss record is the ultimate tiebreaker, then you probably want your win-loss record to be pretty good. You don't necessarily want your strength of record, strength of schedule to be as good. So really the committee was in trouble either way. Here's what the committee could have done. And honestly, in my opinion, this is what the committee should have done. I've always said from the beginning of this season that strength of schedule need to be weighed a little bit more heavily. Why? Because in the past, I don't think strength of schedule was as significant, because in the past, the most significant thing was basically having 1 or 0 losses, because we never saw a 2-loss team make the 4-team playoff. But more importantly, it was conference championships won. And there were teams that did make the field without having won their conference championships, but it was a little bit few and far between. It happened maybe 4 or 5 times. I don't recall exactly how many, but it was a handful of times. So winning your conference championship was really the most important thing in the 4-team model. But that was back when you had divisions. And divisions were measured based on who you played. So it didn't really matter if you came out of the Big Ten West, which was more manageable than the Big Ten East, because ultimately, if you won the Big Ten West, you still had to beat the Big Ten East champion to make the college football playoff. That's no longer the case. So strength of schedule needed to be weighted a little bit more heavily this season, because when you look at schedules across the board, look at Georgia's schedule, for example, where they go on the road to Bama, Ole Miss, and Texas before having Tennessee at home. Look at that schedule and then compare that schedule to the schedule that Texas has played. It's not comparable. Texas didn't hardly leave the state of Texas until midway point of October, and most of their challenging games were there in Austin, Texas. So those two schedules in the SEC, yes, under the same umbrella, yes, all in the same conference, but obviously not equal. So when you look at Ohio State's schedule, Ohio State had to go to Oregon. Ohio State had to go to Penn State. Indiana didn't have to play either of those two teams, but they did play Ohio State, and they didn't perform very well in that game. So I thought that the committee should have weighted strength of schedule more heavily early in the season, but they didn't. They weighed win-loss record more heavily, and ultimately it kind of pinned them back against the wall and didn't offer them much flexibility when SMU lost at the buzzer on a 56-yard game-winning field goal. So it was understandable why they went the way they went, but I think moving forward, it's going to be really important for the committee to establish and make sure everybody understands the importance of strength of schedule, strength of record moving forward, because not all conferences are created equal, and not all conference schedules are created equal. Just because you're from the Big Ten doesn't mean you played a gauntlet. Just because you're from the SEC doesn't mean you had to run through an absolute gauntlet with landmines everywhere. Missouri's schedule was pretty dang manageable. So was Texas's. So were a handful of other teams like Indiana, and a few teams that ended up in the college football playoff 12-team field. Takeaway number 2. The committee, and this is not really on the committee, but it's a byproduct of the system that we have. But this whole first round bye for conference championships needs to go away. It's honestly ridiculous. And I think we could see the writing on the wall. We saw it moving in this direction. And it should not come as a huge surprise because many people have forecasted that maybe the 5 seed is actually easier than the 1 seed. Maybe the 6 seed in this scenario, given who got in, maybe the 6 seed is a little bit more manageable than being the 2 seed. How is that healthy when formatting this postseason? Why is it that Oregon wins the Big Ten championship game and now might await the winner of Tennessee, Ohio State? Meanwhile, the team they beat in the Big Ten championship game gets a home playoff game where they are a healthy favorite against an SMU team that made it in barely, and then they'll get to play in a game against Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl where they'll have a pretty significant talent advantage. So to look at Oregon's path to a national championship, Oregon's path in many ways is maybe even a little bit more, Penn State's path, is a little bit more manageable than Oregon's path. And that's not healthy when evaluating what you're supposed to gain when you win a conference championship. We need to just rate teams and seed teams 1 through 12. There is no automatic, if you're the 9 seed, you automatically get the 4 seed. If you're the 12 seed, you get the 4 seed. It shouldn't be that way. It should really go 1 is Oregon. They are number 1. 2 is Georgia. They are number 2. 3 is Texas. They are number 3. They get a first round bye. 4 is Penn State. They are number 4. They get a first round bye. And then 5 plays 12, 6 plays 11, 7 plays 10, and 8 plays 9. I think that is more appropriate because there's no way we can look at this postseason and feel great about the number 1 ranked team having a more challenging path to a potential championship. It doesn't make sense, and it needs to be evaluated ASAP. Get rid of them. Conference championships, you are guaranteed a spot, but you are not guaranteed a first round bye. Just seed them 1 through 12, and let's move on accordingly. And if they don't want to do that, then we need to strongly consider reseeding teams after the first round. If that happens, I can live with that. I'd prefer it to be 1 through 12, but if they're not willing to go that far because they want to value conference championships above all else, I get it, but you need to at least consider the possibility of reseeding just to make things more manageable for the first overall seed. They earned that ranking. They earned that seeding. They deserve to have a more manageable path than some of their cohorts. Takeaway number 3. There's a lot on the line here in the first round of the playoff. And while we are supposed to treat each individual season as if it has a life of its own, it's impossible when we evaluate these teams. It's impossible to have a little bit of preconceived bias based on what that team or league has accomplished in the past. And this year is a unique season. You have in the first round, you have Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana, all playing in the first round out of the Big Ten. 2 of the 3 are hosting, and Indiana will go to Notre Dame. They're in-state, I guess you could call them rival, but they haven't played in 33 years. But there's a lot on the line for the Big Ten. They now have multiple home games. They're in a really good spot, healthy favorite in the games that they're involved in, with the exception of Indiana. But things look pretty good for the Big Ten. Everyone already has so much respect for the Big Ten. There's no denying that. But I do think when you look at the ACC, this year the ACC got 2 teams in. And I get it. I can be on board with that. I understand it very much. I don't push back on what the committee decided to do. But the ACC has 2 teams in. In the event in which Texas wins convincingly and Penn State wins convincingly against Clemson and SMU respectively, how will that affect the ACC moving forward as far as being given the benefit of the doubt? I think it's something worth watching and something worth evaluating. And then you think, too, about these teams that are hosting home playoff games. This is the ultimate prize with this structure. I think the home playoff environment is the best part of what we have in the 12-team playoff. I love it. I can't wait to be at one of these bowl sites. I can't wait to be calling one of these games. It's going to be incredible. I don't know which one just yet. Well, I do. I just can't announce which one just yet. But stick with us here at Always College Football. You will find out at some point. I can't wait to be there. But I know this. There are a couple teams that are playing at home that are going to have a really, really, really stressful game in the event in which they don't get off to a very good start. I think about Ohio State and some of the challenges that Ohio State are currently dealing with as far as the morale in their fan base and amongst their supporters. Understandable. They just lost to Michigan for the fourth time in a row. I get it. I don't think anyone needs to tell Ohio State fans how to feel. They feel how they want to feel. We support them regardless of how they're feeling. But in the event in which Tennessee goes down, scores on the first possession, Ohio State goes 3 and out, think about how uncomfortable it's likely going to be in the horseshoe for the Ohio State players, and more specifically, the Ohio State coaches. What about with Penn State? They go and they play really well, by the way, in the Big Ten championship game. They make a couple mistakes. Defense doesn't play quite as well as you would hope. But there they are. They're sitting there playing against a team at SMU that I think most Penn State fans anticipate beating. Most Penn State fans anticipate winning that game going away, I would imagine, just watching how Clemson was able to handle SMU at times along the line of scrimmage. So I think Penn State fans are probably feeling pretty confident with the ponies coming to town. Well, what if some of the big plays that Oregon was able to create, what if SMU can create those same big plays? And then the notion and the pressure goes all the way back on Penn State. And man, how is this SMU team running with us? How is this SMU team being able to score and move it up and down the field? It's going to be a lot of pressure on James Franklin and his staff to go out there and perform at a really high level. And what about Notre Dame? Notre Dame, they are playing against Indiana. It's an in-state school. I don't think Notre Dame and Indiana are necessarily going toe-to-toe on a bunch of recruits. It's not like there's bad blood amongst the two programs. They don't play very often, but I do know this: Indiana hasn't won in Notre Dame Stadium since 1898. So it's been a while since they were able to pull off that remarkable feat. But the long question about Notre Dame has been, can they do it in the playoffs? We've seen them do it in the regular season. We've seen them get to the playoff, but we have yet to see them be super competitive in the playoff. Well, what if Indiana comes out, executes like gangbusters like they have at times this season, and starts to move up and down the field, and then that vaunted three-headed rushing attack with the two outstanding running backs and the quarterback? What if that great run defense of Indiana kind of contains Riley Leonard and company? What if Jeremiah Love can't break free? Think about the pressure that could be felt on the sideline if, for whatever reason, the advantage that Notre Dame thinks they might have in the trenches isn't there. So there's a lot to prove for a lot of these schools. And I didn't mention Texas, but I think Texas, they're riding pretty high right now, right? They're riding pretty high. Steve Sarkisian can do no wrong in the eyes of the Longhorn faithful. But the other three situations, Penn State, Ohio State, and Notre Dame, there have been times in which the fans have been somewhat frustrated with the performance of their team, not just this year, but at other times throughout their coach's tenure. Moving on to takeaway number 4, these matchups. And I think this is going to be a real fascinating part about this new playoff format, is that it might not be all these teams, by the way, because of the portal. Every single one of these teams has a couple flaws. Every single one of these teams has a hole or two, right? If you just want to just go down the list, I'll tell you what the hole is for a lot of these teams. Let's start with number 1, Oregon. I think Oregon is the most complete team. I think they had the fewest questions. Man alive, watching quarterback run and what it did to Oregon and the amount of yards they gave up on the ground against Penn State was something that is going to have me feeling a little bit worried here over the next few weeks. Number 2, what's the hole for Georgia? Well, they've been really inadequate running the football this year. They've at times had some struggles turning the football over. And Carson Beck, their starting quarterback, his availability is completely unknown at the moment. Question number 3, Boise. We know that. Can they step up in weight class and play against teams in a setting like this? Number 4, Arizona State. Not great when it comes to their pass rush. And they're without their number 1 wide receiver, even though the passing game didn't really take much of a back seat there against Iowa State. Number 5, Texas. I think their pass protection is something that would be concerning to me. They've given up a bunch of sacks. They've been able to run the ball at times. They haven't been able to run the ball very well against Georgia, but the offensive line has gotten exposed from time to time with pass protection that Quinn Ewers has seen. Penn State, manufacturing explosive plays in the passing game has been a big question. I think that maybe those are starting to be relieved a little bit, but I also think imposing their will at the line of scrimmage along the offensive line was something I was concerned about. Maybe not so much anymore based on what I saw most recently, but still something that is of concern. Notre Dame, I think it's their passing attack overall. I think they're really good running the football, but in the event in which the running game is not super productive, can they beat you with Riley Leonard through the air? Number 8, Ohio State, offensive line. Offensive line. Can they run the ball against the best teams in the country? Tennessee, inconsistency in the passing attack. And is their secondary up to the test when playing against a team that can air it out and really pick you apart through the air? That was the big question coming in, but their pass rush was able to neutralize it most of the year. It just will it be able to against Ohio State? Number 10, Indiana. Can they step up in weight class? We saw them one time this year against a playoff caliber opponent. It didn't go well for them against Ohio State. I do think they're better than what they put on tape against the Buckeyes, but there is a question about them being able to step up. SMU, how will they hold up along the line of scrimmage offensively? Will they give Kevin Jennings enough time, and will they be able to run the football with Brashard Smith? And then number 12, Clemson. Phil Maffa's banged up, and they haven't been as good against the run this year. So every single one of these teams has question marks. We just went through all of them, right? But here's the question that I have. It's really more about styles and matchups. Think back to last year, 2023. Washington beat Texas in the semifinal game, right? Well, why do you think that was? Because Texas had one Achilles heel, and that was deep ball given up by their defense. Explosive passing attacks, giving them fits. It's exactly what Washington had, and that's exactly why it was a terrible matchup for the Longhorns that night. I think there's going to be plenty to iron out with some of these matchups, and it might be matchup specific. I look at Ohio State, Tennessee, for example, probably the most marquee matchup of the bunch, right? You have 2 blue bloods that'll be teeing it up. You have an elite pass rush with Tennessee working against an offensive line that has had their fair share of challenges this year. Can Ohio State come far enough along the front to be better against what will likely be the best edge rushers they've seen this season? That's a real question mark. So it might very well move more towards the NFL. And it's really not so much about the teams and what they do right. It might be about what they don't do so well. And can they cover up some of the warts that they might have on their own roster? That will be something that we'll watch very closely, and the matchups, I think, will be a lot of fun to break down here over the next few weeks. And then takeaway number 5. I'll just admit this, okay? I have not been someone that has been overwhelmingly supportive of the need for expansion. I am not an expansionist. I believe that we had a good system. I believe that expanding to 12 felt like too many. If I'm going to be completely honest, I felt like 6 was kind of appropriate, maybe 8. 12 just felt like a lot, if I'm going to be completely honest. But now that we've gone through one regular season, I am more optimistic about the amount of teams that will make the field. I really am. Now, I think they need to adjust the criteria. I think they need to adjust the seating. I think there's tweaks that need to be made for sure. But at the same time, I think 12's about right, because at 12, you're already evaluating teams that have flaws, right? Those teams being Alabama, frankly, SMU, who got in, but we'll add them to the mix. Miami, Ole Miss, South Carolina, all those teams have flaws. They've shown that throughout the course of the season. That's why in some cases they have 3 losses. but they have multiple losses. Like, they have flaws. There's no denying that those teams are not perfect. But I do think that 12 feels about right. If it expands beyond 12 to 14, now you're including a lot of flawed football teams. You might, in a 12-team format, have one or two, but you're probably not going to have 3 or 4 in a 12-team format. So I'm pretty encouraged about the number, but I do think we need to take a good, long, hard look at the criteria and how we seed this thing 1 through 12, because there's no reason why the number 1 seed should have more difficult matchups than the team that they just beat in the Big Ten championship game. So I'm very excited. And I think as far as the playoff is concerned, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I do think it's a net positive for the sport, because I really look at how much interest has been generated. And I know, based on our numbers, our internal numbers here at Always College Football, the amount of views, the amount of reaction, the amount of podcast downloads, we are at an all-time high over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Why do you think that was? Because more and more teams are playing games that have real, meaningful results here in the month of November. And ultimately, when interest is up, and when fan engagement is up, and when every game seemingly matters in a given weekend because of the potential fallout, perception, what have you, then we are starting to hit our stride as a sport. And while I think there's a lot of things to iron out and a lot of things to clean up and things that need to be fixed, and we can address some of those things in the offseason, let's see how the playoff unfolds, and we'll watch how this thing all we'll see how it all irons itself out. We'll see. But as far as where I stand right now here on December 8th, I think the 12-team playoff so far has been outstanding for the sport. And if you were to ask me, gun to head, when this was pushed through and this was approved and this was, hey, we're going with the 12-team playoff, I would have said, oh no, I don't love it. Well, I kind of do now. And I do think it's going to be really fun. And I do think these matchups are going to create a lot of interest. And we hope that you'll tune in for all of them beginning on December 20th, 8 o'clock Eastern time on ESPN and ABC. For all of us here at Always College Football, we really appreciate the support that you guys have given us. We appreciate how much you love the sport that we love. It means a lot to know how much you guys are downloading, how much you're watching, how much you're interacting. And it means an awful lot to go to all these different parts of the country, most recently in Charlotte or in Bristol, or heading to DC here in a little bit. I seemingly always have someone come up and say, man, Always College Football, really love what you guys are doing. That means so much to us. And we do it for y'all. We do it for y'all. And selfishly, we do it for us because we really love it too. We really have a good time doing the show. And we hope that you guys can feel that energy and passion and excitement every time we turn on our cameras, turn on our computers, and put a microphone in front of us to talk some ball. So for all of us here at Always College Football, tremendous season. For Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We're not going anywhere. We'll be back a little later this week. We'll have some interviews. We'll have some conversations with people that will be playing in the playoff, what the preparation looks like. We'll, of course, preview games leading into this weekend, whether it's Army, Navy, or we'll set the table for the first round playoff games and things like that. So there's a lot that we still have to do between now and when we announce who the national champion is on January 20th. So for all of us here at ACF, I'm Greg. We hope you have an awesome day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.